In this video, we'll take a look at scatterplots and their close relative, the quadrant chart, regression and trend lines, and correlation, and take a look at how to create this kind of visualization in Tableau. It's one of the more common visualizations you'll be called to perform, so it's important for you to become familiar. The advantage of Tableau is that when you create these charts, you can use all of the sorting and filtering tools that we have available and use them to create some rather interactive dashboards and interactive visualizations that help your data consumers get the answers they need and explore the data that they've asked for. So in Tableau, you can set up a very interactive visualization that can be done pretty rapidly. The example we'll use, as seen in your book chapter, uses data from the National Hockey League's top 100 players. We've also taken a look at those top 100 players at different times. I have already created one of these sheets or one of these workbooks to show you some of the visualizations here, and then we'll walk through how I designed each one. And so mine looks a little different than the book. I use a different image in the background, but you'll see how quickly we can make each one of these sheets. So let's learn some Tableau. So the first thing we'll need to do is connect to a data source. So if I go in my Tableau, I have my Microsoft Excel file. And in this case, I'm looking for my NHL Top 100. This is right here. We see our data has imported. Go to the worksheet. Every time this gets a little extra sensitive. Okay. Very good. So once we've connected to our data source, one of the first things we'll take a look at is we want to explore the goals that each player has scored and the assists each player has scored. In hockey, when you add both together, their total points is the result. So we all know that goals are when a player actually puts the puck in the net, that's a goal, and a player who passes the puck to a player who puts it in the goal, that's the assist. They're two important scoring metrics, and what we can do is even use Show Me to help us create our scatter plot. We're going to use a scatter plot and choose that because we're looking at these two variables, assists and goals, looking at their relationships. And so I can do it one way by selecting the player and then holding the Control button and select goals, G, and assists, A. Now that I have these three selected, I can go to Show Me, and you can see that I can select a scatter plot from the Show Me. That's the easiest way to create a scatter plot in Tableau. So you see we have the sum of goals in the columns, the sum of assists in the rows, and each one of these points is the player, and it shows their intersection in this grid. So in the scatter plot, each player is an intersection on the grid, so where their assists intersect with their goals. We also have player in the marks card. And as we just take a general look at data, we'll see that there is one major outlier, and that would be the great one, Wayne Gretzky, the greatest hockey player in the NHL of all time. And it also shows just how far and above he was from the other players as far as goals and assists. So what we can do is use some other ways, some other variables here to help transmit more information about these players. So we can add, for example, games played. So it might be one thing to see that a person scored many goals or many assists, but how many games did they actually play? That GP pill right here in the measures, if we drag this to color, it will show us a variation here. We can then also use their total goals plus assists, their points, and that's P, and we can drag that to the size in the marks card. So we can see easily if they've had more points, it's a bigger circle, fewer points, the smaller circles. And so we can actually, and I would actually drag this over here. And we can make this even fancier. So what we can see right now are 4 different pieces of data on this scatter plot. We see goals and assists. We see the number of games played in terms of color. So the darker the circle, right, the more games played. And the size, which just tells us total points. Now, the empty circles might not convey as much information, so there's something we can do about that. If we go to color, we can change our colors. And if we go to size, we can change our size. But if we go here and we edit colors, we can, change our colors. So if we'd like to have more stepped colors or anything like that, we don't have to use the automatic palette. We might, for example, use the orange blue or orange blue white diverging. Try that. Okay, so we have that. Let's see. We can format this a little bit. And in color again, we can change the opacity. We can also change this. I would change this to circles. And now if I go to color, I can choose a dark border if I like. Okay. Now I can choose opacity and make them a little more transparent slightly. So if I've got multiple people pretty close, you can take a look. And so it also helps me compare players. So for example, if I see this light color circle here, Guy Lafleur, is a top 100 player, scored an awful lot of points, and did that in 1,100 games, whereas some other players here had a significant number of games, more games than he did. And so that tells you a little bit about his overall production. And so, what's lacking on this chart is it would be much easier for my data consumers if I was able to show the names, and all I need to do is take player and drag that to the label card in the marks card. And if I click on label, I can choose the font, I can choose the alignment, I can even choose bold if I wish. So I'm going to bold that. And so here I've got a listing of players, so we can immediately see some of these. And one of the nice parts is Tableau automatically tends to label the ones in the outside. So a lot of the outliers that become very interesting in these types of scatter plots we have. So we can see Wayne Gretzky is miles above and beyond, right? Above and beyond. And so what about the points without labels? We can always hover over them and we can see the names. And so we can use those tool tips to help us there. Now suppose we want to add some filters. For example, okay, did all of these players play the same position? So for example, I'm a hockey fan, so I know that Scott Stevens was a defenseman. Defensemen don't score lots of goals as a rule. Wayne Gretzky was a forward. That was his job. So we might also take a look at, well, how do we compare this on a more fair basis? So how do we compare defensemen to defensemen and forwards to forwards? So, or even among forwards, centers to centers, and so on and so forth. We can take position and add that to filters. And I'll select all for now. Click OK. And all I need to do is show the filter. And I'll pull that over here. So now if I want to select my data and say I just want to look at defensemen, notice by the way that Tableau changes the view slightly. So you only see the defenseman. What you don't see is that upper quadrant where we had Wayne Gretzky, because it's not even necessary. So we'll re-situate. And what we see here compared to defenseman is Ray Bourque is above and beyond most of the other defensemen on the chart. And Paul Coffey is not far behind him. And we're all familiar with Paul Coffey after our last unit. Now if I just wanted to compare centers, you can see that they populate, they're a large population on this list. Wayne Gretzky still far and above. The other defensemen are left wings, our right wings, our centers, and now our defensemen. All of them. So, one of the other things we can do is add a background image to make this look even cooler. And so, I have a standard background image, so the easiest way to do this is on your menu bar up top. You'll see map, right? And then you'll put in background images. And then you select the NHL Top 100, which is what this is. Now you want to add an image. And I'm going to browse my computer. And I'm going to use this NHL shield here. And I'm going to wash it out slightly because I don't want the colors too primary. I want to have it nice enough as a background, but not to interrupt with the other colors. Click OK. And I want to specify a field range. So it's not enough to just say, okay, put it in the background. I have to specify how big I want this thing. And so it's going to go on the goals and assists axis. So I want the right to go to about 1,000, which is where this ends. So for goals, I want it to go to 1,000. And for assists, I want it to go to, it looks like 2,000 on the top. Click OK. OK, I need to specify a better range. It gets a little testy. So how about there we go, 2,200. And I click OK. And there we go. So now we have our background image, we have our scatter plot, so we've added those things. So this is quite a fun little design. And so there's other ways of showing multiple quantities, and one of the other ways is using stacked bars. And so we can create a stacked bar chart, because in this chart, what we're looking to do is look at efficiency. And so it's not enough to just say, these great players scored all of these points. I'm sorry, this image is not working out for me. Not at all. So let me undo that image, and let's try again. And it's not working out for me because I don't like the size. I didn't like the right border. So I want to wash that out, that's for sure. And I want it about 2,200 high. I don't know if I wanted a full 1,000 here. Maybe I want it to be 900 on the right. Of course, it's going to give me a hard time. Better. All right. Happier with that. Okay. Much happier with that. So, to get back, we can use a different kind of chart to look at efficiency. So we want to look at points per game, goals per game, assists per game, these guides. So we're looking for the per game rates. And so we can make a new visualization on a new sheet. And so looking at rates per game, we want to calculate goals per game, assists per game, and points per game. So it's pretty easy. We'll make 3 calculated fields. So if I go to analysis and I create some calculated fields, so we'll call it calculation 1, points per game, PPG, and that is the sum of points, P, right, divided by the sum of games played, because this is a rate, so the fields in the numerator and denominator, right, are going to be different. And click OK. So we'll create another calculated field, and we'll call this goals per game, or GPG. Sum, same idea, sum of goals slash sum of games played. Calculation is valid. And then we'll create a final calculated field, and we'll call this assists per game, or APG. Sum assists slash sum and games played. Okay, so we've created our 3 calculated fields: goals per game, points per game, assists per game. And we're looking to see, is Wayne Gretzky that much better than the other players, or how do players stack up when we make these comparisons? So here is how we create our visualization of efficiency. So I'll start with the player, because that's the first thing I want to look at is the player, and dragging the player pill from dimensions to rows. So I get a list of the players alphabetically. And so now I have so many measure values I want to drag through here. I can drag measure values from the measures area here and drag them over here to columns. You'll see I get a number of these measure values, and I don't want them all. So when I do drag all of the measure values over, it creates bars that are the sum of all the measures for each player. And so I want to drag all the different measure names from this dimensions area to the color shelf. So I drag measures names from the dimensions area here to the color shelf here. Okay. And that breaks up all of the bars by color. So every one of the measure names now has a different color to it. Now I can drag everything except the aggregate assists per game and goals per game out of the measures values area below the marks card. Right? And it only leaves the assists per game and goals per game markers here. So everything else I just want to drag out. There we go. So now I have this two-color chart, alphabetically ordered by player, which shows goals per game and assists per game. Now I might want to change the colors. So I can change my colors in the color chart here. And so maybe I want to use something different. Like I want for assists per game, I want orange, and for goals per game, I want blue. Click OK. So I can do that. I could also, like your book uses a black and gray, so I could use I think a gray for this, or I can even choose up a different set of colors. So for goals per game, I can make a darker gray, so I could have like this color here. And so now that I've changed the colors, I can click the down arrow in the blue player pill like this, right? So we see that. And then I click sort. And so I can sort by descending order by the points per game field. So here, right, descending order. Field, right? So I can click field. So you see how I do that? So I click descending, and then I could choose data source order, or I can be more specific and click the field. And then I can choose the field name that I want to sort on. So in descending order by points per game, PPG. And there I go. I have my custom visualization here. And so we can see that Wayne Gretzky is a big outlier in sheet 1 on the scatter plot when we look at the total number of goals and assists scored. But when it comes to efficiency, meaning if we look at the number, the points scored per game based on how many games are played, we see that he's got some pretty close competition here in Mario Lemieux And then Mike Bossy, there's some distance. So he had some pretty close competition here. And if he was in the top 100, there would be a player named Eric Lindros who would be right in there in the points per game field. So it's a little more difficult to compare assists per game. So when we look at the stack bar chart, that gets to be a little more complicated. We see them, it's more difficult to compare them. And so there's advantages to the stack bar chart, there's disadvantages, and in this case, that's one of the disadvantages. So if we wanted to have some other comparisons, we could try changing the stack bar to a dual dot chart plot. So we would change the marks from the marks card from automatic to bars or circles. Or from automatic or bars, we change it to circles. Or you could try shapes. And you could add row and grid lines if you want. Format, and for rows we'll have a little bit more. You go there and there. There. So we can have our row and grids. And so that's a bit more of a challenge. Another way of looking at these comparisons is adding regression and trend lines. Right? So regression is visualized by adding a trend line on a scatter plot. It indicates how well the points fit the trend line. And the measure we use for that is called R squared. So Tableau has that as part of its standard functions. So it's really easy to add. And so in this, we look at shots and goals, right? Because you can't have a goal if you don't take a shot. So on this case, we want to take our player, let's see, players, our shots, which are marked by this, and our goals here. Show me. And we want a scatter plot. Okay. So why is it this way? Okay, shots are on the x-axis, right? This is where you place independent variables. And I'll sort out these nulls, filter. So you want the independent variable here on the x-axis. So shots you're going to take. Goals are dependent on shots. So the dependent variable is on the y-axis. So in this case, goals is on the y-axis. And now we can add we have the player data on the shelf, and we can add player data to labels. Again, so we have that. We can also do like we did in the first one. Positions go to color, right? So I move my position marker over here. So now I know I have the positions arrayed by colors. And we also notice that the values here are different. 900 maximum on the y-axis and 6,500 on the right boundary of the x-axis. And we can't have the axes of equal length, so the data points would be very close together above the y-axis, so it's you wouldn't really notice any trends. So we need to add trend lines which help us identify those trends. So one of the ways we do that is we go over to Analytics, right? And I drag trend line from model, okay? And I want a linear trend line. And there I get a trend line for each position filter. So that we're filtered here, positions on the color shelf have a filter on the color shelf. And so here is the right wing, here is defenseman, right? Center and left wing. And so that's how we add the trend lines. So if we only want to show one trend line, right, for all of these points together, right, we just right-click in the grid area. We select trend lines, show trend lines right here, right? Uncheck the box that says allow a trend line per color. So in this case, what we want to do is we can uncheck that. And we can show the trend lines. We edit our trend lines. And see where on the box here it says allow a trend line per color? We uncheck that. Click OK. Now, there's another change we should make, is that if I didn't take any shots, I wouldn't score any goals. So one other alteration in our trend lines as we edit them is that we want to force the Y-intercept to 0. Right? So that means if I take no shots, I score no goals, and that's my starting point. And so this is the overall trend line for all of these positions. So it's an upward sloping line. So that means there's a positive correlation between shots taken and goals scored. Okay, that's not surprising. But how do we describe the relationship here? And so if we go over any of the points in the line, right, we see on each point of the players, we see their labels. But if we go over the line, we see the p-value and r-squared values. Okay? And so here, we have an equation that says, right, goals are equal to 0.134198 times the shots. So that's how much the line rises, right, for every one shot taken. There's a very small chance on the p-value here, right? It tells us that there's a very small chance that any correlation would produce such a relationship. So these are definitely correlated, right? These are strongly correlated. And we can see more about the fit. So if we right-click on the trend line, we can see describe the trend model, and we can get our mathematics here. So if I wanted to do some, pretty advanced statistical analysis, I could, and Tableau has a lot of that built internally. So the advantage of using it, say compared to some of the Excel packages or other visualization packages, is that you can do a number of these pretty rapidly. And part of the goal in data exploration and visualization is being able to get this material to your data consumer fairly rapidly on a good turnaround, and then be able to really explore what we see in the data pretty rapidly as well. And so that's one way we can do it. Now, we can also look at the quadrant chart, which is another way of looking at things. So if we wanted to do something similar here, we could go here. We could turn off the trend lines, right? Take the trend line away, and we could start a quadrant chart by adding reference lines. And so here I would just go to Analytics, and I'd add a reference line in the custom, right? And what I want here is I want the line, and I have the chance to do both. And what I want is here, per pane, on the average. And what I've done is created my trend line here. Now another way I could do it is I could add reference line one by one, and so I could do shots, right? And I'd have the shots on average per pane, and OK. And then I would do the same here and drag it again, except this time on goals. Average per pane, OK. So you can get it in 2 steps or 1 step. And so now it's divided into quadrants. So now we can see on whether they scored above or below average numbers of goals, or whether they took, above or below an average number of shots throughout their career. Okay, so we can then annotate the quadrant names. So for example, in this area, we would annotate, and this is an area. We call this higher accuracy. Okay. Why? Because in this area, you have people who scored more goals, right, higher on the x-axis, but lower, right, value on the, higher on the y-axis, lower value on the x-axis. So they were very efficient. So Brian Trottier, for example, right, he scored 524 goals, and he shot the puck 2,841 times. Okay, Wayne Gretzky wasn't as efficient. Now, the people in this line, so if we annotate this area, right, we have higher production. So they produced more, right? And here, we have lower production. And here, we have lower accuracy. So what does this mean? Lots of shots, fewer goals. Here, fewer shots, fewer goals. Fewer shots, more goals. A lot of shots, a lot of goals. But quadrant charts can be pretty handy. I see them quite often now. They've become very popular, especially when doing market analyses. So whether or not you should invest in a particular new market, or say pursue marketing a new product, or providing a new service. One of the ways of looking at the availability of similar products or other types of services in that space is by looking at the relationship between availability and how many people are taking it, and you can see whether or not to pursue or invest more or maybe move out of that space. And so it is very popular. You'll see them more and more, and a very handy technique to have in your Tableau tool belt. So practice along with the exercise, and I wish you all the best, and let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.